Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG and welcome to an HDR primer slash shopping kit kind of video. I'm going to cover a couple different TVs at the end of this, so give you some ideas of some technology that's out there. But what I'm going to do is give you a primer for HDR, for high dynamic range, what's coming into your TV sets, and what you're seeing on the store shelves, especially for people who are going out there for Black Friday or for Christmas or whatever holidays you may celebrate, and you're finding those good deals and you're sort of trying to figure out what exactly does all this mean. That's sort of what I'm going to try to describe here. Now, one thing I won't do is describe a bunch of different TVs at the end. One of the reasons why is because we have such a variation on TVs now within the same model groups that sometimes the difference between two models is the bezel or the friggin' stand. So we're getting to the point to where you can match bezels. That's usually a good place to be. If there is a model that maybe has a model number in there that looks like it's got all the features and doesn't, I might mention that at the end. But overall, I'm going to mention a couple TVs to you guys in various different price ranges that you can go with. So let's discuss HDR for just a second, give you a brief primer. If you consider normal television, normal SDR lighting, if you consider that, and this is a layman term, and the mathematics isn't exactly right, but if you consider that 1 to 10 on your scale of brightness, 1 being the darkest that you can get your screen in whatever technology you use, and 10 being the brightest, HDR is 100 steps in between each one of those. So instead of 1 to 2, it's 1, and then it's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all the way up to 2, then 2. You get my drift. So what happens is there's a far larger variation there, and an ability to have discrete brightness and contrast levels. And then you add that to a thing called wide color gamut. Wide color gamut, the easiest way to describe that would be it's basically the same thing, but it's for color. That would be the easiest way to describe it. What these technologies are trying to do is improve your picture, but they're not adding resolution. These are tied to 4K, mind you. There were some 1080p screens that were talked about, but I don't think those have come to fruition. I haven't seen them. It's possible to do that. I don't think there's any actual screens out there that you can buy that are 1080p that have HDR. I could be wrong though, so feel free to check me on that. But none of the major manufacturers, they're all 4K with HDR added on. So when you look at HDR and you sort of see what it is, it's trying to deliver to you more color. It's trying to deliver to you more brightness. Well, why would that matter to you? I guess the easiest way to describe it would be if you played, or watched Batman, the new Batman movies, that the dark ones. If you watch or play, Rise of the Tomb Raider or some video game or an Uncharted, where it gets really dark in some areas. Sometimes you'll notice that you maybe have to play with the brightness and contrast because you'll walk into an area and you'll be all, I should see more definition in this area. I should see more discrete levels. It shouldn't just be like lit, jet black, like light sort of has a fade off. It doesn't just go, okay, here's your light bar around you, and then it just disappears to jet black. And so what happens is HDR and wide color gamut are trying to get that to actually occur. They're trying to make it so you can see those. And there's two technologies, or 2.5 technologies, that do this, and I'm going to discuss them. You have your LCD LED side, and you've got your OLED, and these are both trying to do HDR. What's the difference? The easiest way to describe it would be LCD LED brightens the back of the screen, takes the light from the back source, and then filters it through color matrices and various hardware to shine onto the back of the pixel. Okay, so it's a little bit rougher than OLED, which I'll describe in a second. What does this allow though? Well, in many cases, it allows for a slightly brighter picture. It allows for some other areas where, at least in the past, it beat out OLED. We're seeing OLED sort of take off. Not in price though. It's still quite expensive, which I'll describe in a bit. But you have your LCD LED, older technology, very robust. People know how to use it. They put some hardware in that's fixed some of the issues. But overall, since you're brightening the entire back of the screen, there is no LED or LCD that's able to actually shut out all that light. And so what happens is the darkest dark that you can see on those screens is never jet black, because there's always some kind of light in the back of it, okay? It's not completely non-transparent. There is a little bit of light that's always showing. Now, what happens with OLED? Well, OLED's a little different. OLED treats every pixel like its own projector, technically. What that means is it can turn the power off to the pixel, okay? So you can get a jet black, absolutely jet black pixel on OLED. And that's why you'll hear a lot of people say things like, oh, OLED's got, natural blacks, or the black is black, or, that it can display darkness better, what have you. That's true. Because of the way that technology works, it actually can do that if it's a good screen. I mean, there are some crap OLEDs out there, or ones that don't do the best on various other elements of HDR. But that's your differences between the two. OLED is your more discrete, I guess, kind of delivery system for light, because it is just coloring that pixel itself. And you have these different technologies that are sort of competing, and it's been about price for a while. It's also been about your various features, which I'm going to describe in a moment. But one thing I do want to describe is one small area where LCD and LED can differ in and amongst themselves. OLED, all the TVs are going to have generally the basic same technology delivering power to that pixel, okay? But LCDs, LEDs will have something called full array lighting, or edge lit. Now, what does that mean? Well, full array lighting the easiest way to describe it would be a sort of a middle step in a way between your basic style of delivery of light and an OLED in a way, because you're actually able to turn off and brighten sections of the screen because there's a full array of light behind it. With edge lit, it actually lights from the top or bottom or sides, and I don't think I've seen, there are some that are sides actually. I know for a fact top and bottom obviously, but and what they do is they get that light to the color matrices, and you can see it sometimes in a thing called pillaring that can happen on your TV screens, where you get a little bit of brightness coming off when they shine up, because they're literally brighter at the bottom, shining up and then going in to the area where they need to be delivered. So you have your edge lit and your full array. Does that mean that full array always looks better than edge lit? No, it doesn't. There's another thing that goes on there, and I'll discuss it now just for a brief second, and that's local dimming. Local dimming is not needed on OLED, so we won't talk about that. But for LED, LCD, one of the ways in which they can get away from the weakness is they have a technology called local dimming. And what it does is it takes that brightness and it will dim around it at a different degree than you would, more, I guess you would say, aggressive degree. And in fact, you'll actually hear some people say some settings like low, medium, and high, like high looks a little too aggressive. It cuts a little too much light out. But what they try to do is they try to get a more contrast from the light to the dark in those bright areas. So if you have like a ball and pong bouncing around, you might be able to notice a bloom around that discrete circle, right? Around that very definitive circle. And if you turn on your local dimming, it might cut down. But if you turn it on too much, depending on the set, you might really cut into it and actually notice that. Now, I know that's a lot, but there's a reason why. Because there's a lot of different technologies here, and they all offer different caveats, different bonuses and pluses. And because I can't cover every TV, I think it's best that I cover all these so that you could always go back and watch it if you found something about your TV that you wanted to sort of investigate. So we've discussed HDR, wide color gamut, we've discussed edge, and of course, full array and local dimming when it comes to your LCD, LED kind of stuff and your OLED. So let's talk about input lag. So input lag is a pretty big deal, obviously, to gamers. When it comes to a movie, right? When it comes to a TV show, all of that information, the audio, can just be matched up to the video and you're good to go. But when you're playing a video game, if you move right and your cycle between you doing the activity going into your video game system through possibly a receiver, and then going into your video game system and then being displayed on the TV, you want the shortest route possible, okay? You want the shortest route possible. And so what you'll get is a thing called game mode. And this occurs in most TVs. Some TVs don't need it now because the technology is getting better. But when HDR is on, it is technically by the TV considered a process. It's almost like your anti-aliasing in a way. You can consider it a process, and it can add on a little bit of a delay. And so what happens is you'll hear people talking about input delay a lot. Now, some TVs that have just recently come out have great input lag. No, good input lag when not in game mode, which is pretty crazy. Many of them have to go to game mode. For example, the Samsung 8000 has to go into game mode, and when it does, it goes from like, I can't remember, I think it's like 120 milliseconds down to like 27 or something crazy like that, very low. So game mode changes a couple things, turns off a couple processes, stops you from being able to adjust a couple different settings, but overall, you get that input lag down to a level. Now, why would input lag matter on the TV so much when you're doing games? Like, let's say it's in your 50s or something. Well, the problem is it still has to go through the game. Games have different input lag, and it may go into the receiver. So it behooves you as a gamer to make sure that every route is the quickest. That's just the way you want it. You want to make sure that you don't have anything that's slowing everything down. It is important that you do that if you're a competitive gamer. And so we'll certainly discuss that at the end when I talk about these different televisions and their input lag. But input lag, highly important. You definitely want to understand that if you have a TV that's got a game mode, there is most likely a reason why that's there. And you will want to at least check it, because most likely what you will find is that you notice instantly, especially on shooters, third-person games, you'll notice somewhat, but you'll notice that speed and movement has really increased. So when it comes to these technologies, when it comes to HDR, I want to cover the overall feel of everything, the overall way in which LED, LCD can deliver, and OLED, and then cover some TVs. So we've covered edge lit, we've covered SDR versus HDR, wide color gamut, all that kind of stuff, local dimming. When it comes to HDR, one of your most important elements is where you're watching the actual content. And this is crazy, but you have to take this into account now. So you're going to see a lot of different reviews. These reviews exist everywhere, where somebody will say, oh, when you're watching it from the edge, it changes, it gets dimmer, blah, blah, blah. Everybody I've ever talked to, that has never been an issue. And some people have really wide living rooms, really wide viewing areas. But what does matter, just like a projector, mind you, is the brightness of your room. And here's why. If you have an OLED screen and you are watching it in a dark room, many OLEDs don't go as bright, okay, as the LCDs, LEDs. And so what you have is, you have a situation where when they don't go as bright, then a darker area helps, just like a projector would. Because what it does is, you can always shine light on something, but you can't suck it away, right? And so if you turn off the light, you're actually helping that picture look better, because it can more naturally, it's not getting reflections and things like that. You'll even see people talking about reflections. They'll be like, this screen is shiny, this one isn't. If you have a handheld, you have a telephone, you might have a screen protector on it that changes how it reflects, and that could actually bother you, whether it's on or off, those kind of things. So where you watch them, OLED, I will absolutely say, does much better in a dark room than it does in a bright room. And when I say bright, I mean not necessarily that it's just bright everywhere, but especially when you're talking about ceiling lights where the TV's away from the ceiling light, you don't necessarily need to see the reflection, but if there's any of a bright cone of light, you will notice that more easily on an OLED screen for the most part. And that's just the way it is. That's the technology right now. OLED is really coming to grips with their brightness, which I'm going to talk about a particular OLED here. But unfortunately, they're so expensive, or more expensive than normal TVs and the normal kind of HDR TVs, that I think for some people they're sort of, like, what is it worth it? And I will just say this: if you've got yourself a game room and you're a person who watches a show or shows or plays games, and it's somewhat darker, then an OLED is going to be an easier choice for you than an LED LCD. Now, why do those matter, LED LCD, what are some of their positives? One of them is brightness, and Sony has a TV that is bright as, it's insane how bright that TV is. Samsung 8000, super bright TV. They can brighten certain areas, and this is one place where OLED has a problem. They have what's called a brightness limiter on them right now. And so they will actually literally dim if it gets too bright. Now, you won't notice this in a dark area as much, but you will notice it if you are a computer user. So if you're like me and you're always on the computer and you have any kind of white screens, sorry, I hit this. You have any kind of white screens and, bright contrasty, your black text and your big, white web page or what have you, you will actually physically see that OLED dim that screen. And that is right now just a natural negative of OLED. I don't know of a TV that doesn't have some kind of dimming when it comes to OLED, and that is not something you're actually seeing on the older style TVs, the LCDs, LEDs. So, for example, you have your Samsung. I'm going to tell you guys, I test these TVs all the time. I'm always testing TVs. And this TV is so bright that I was playing Batman Arkham Knight. And in Batman Arkham Knight, you can climb up to the top of the buildings. There's a storm going. And this was not on purpose, mind you. This was just us testing out this TV. I went to make a sandwich and lightning went off and I had the sound down and I thought something had exploded in the TV. That's how bright it was. It is redonkulous how bright they can get. Brightness in TVs and HDR in particular is covered in nits, is what it's called, which is a highly unfortunate name. and how bright they can go. And the brighter you can go and above a certain level, the more you're basically delivering true HDR, because they do need some brightness there. These OLEDs, these LCDs, they all do it. But one thing you will notice is that a lot of them, when they talk about their brightness, the OLEDs will have that natural limiter. And that brightness for that lightning, that was okay. I didn't notice it as bad there, but I will tell you one place where I could certainly notice something weird going on with the brightness being affected, and that was, unfortunately, Assassin's Creed Origins. You have a desert area, super bright, and as you're playing, and if you're facing it for a while, if you're just into the game, you may not notice this, but you do it enough times, you probably will, and you'll see this weird thing go on. And it's really difficult to describe until you see it, or if you use a PC, but it's something to definitely keep in mind. So you look at these technologies, and there's so many pluses. LEDs, LCDs are definitely cheaper. I'm going to discuss their prices in a second. We're talking sub 800 now, and many sub 800. You're talking like, I think one or two are in the $600 range, and they're just absolutely excellent for what they offer. With some have full array with their local dimming, so they've just got a really good picture. It may not get as dark as an OLED. It may not get that perfect dark color, or that perfect dark lack of color, lack of light that you get on an OLED, but you get that brighter other end of the spectrum, which is sort of funny that we have that right now, but you really do. You have these technologies sort of competing. One able to do the bottom end incredibly well, insanely well. An OLED picture in the right room it's mind-boggling. You see it and you're all, whoa, that is insane. But then you see some of the caveats there as well. And then the same thing, like I said, where I thought the friggin' light, but something in the back of that TV had exploded when that lightning went off. So you have the other brightness factor there. So let's talk about a couple TVs. The first I want to talk about is the Sony. I wrote these down, the 900E in particular, though. So this is, I would consider it the middle of the line TV, but it's got some top line features. And one of the things about this TV, you're talking, it depends on where you go for the sale prices. It's sub 1,000 now for sure in some of the sale areas. But what you're talking about is a TV that can go insanely bright, redonkulously bright, brighter than the Samsung, which was the king for a little while, brightest TV of the year, I think, and just unbelievably bright. Now, that is going to be great if you're a PC user and you want to do PC games on it, and you want to do your console games, and you want to use your web browser on it. That thing is just going to be insane. You'll be able to really dial that in, and it's got pretty good local dimming, and that is just overall a great. It's got a full array for its lighting. That is just overall a really good TV. Now, a newcomer has come, and this is crazy because I'm sure you guys all remember when you were growing up, there was some company that sucked and then they didn't suddenly, right? Or a company that came in to an industry and shocked everybody because there was an opening there for some reason technologically. TCL, and it's the P607, is a incredibly cheap for its range, 600 and below. And this TV, not only is it very bright, it's got really good, just all the way it delivers all of its information. It delivers a good bright picture, it delivers good color array, all of that kind of stuff. But its input lag is insanely low for a system that doesn't require you to go into game mode for a lot of the different ways in which you want to play, which is nice because as somebody who's tested a lot of these TVs, I wouldn't say they're unplayable if you're out of game mode, but they're unplayable if you're out of game mode, depending on the game, obviously. So you really want to keep an eye on TCL. They're a company that has a lot of good, incredibly low-cost TVs. So you've got your Sony in the middle, the 900. There's a couple different models there that are really good and insanely bright, offering just that slightly better color and picture than the TCL. But the TCL coming in at a price that's going to blow you away, right? You're going to look at that and you're going to say, and I've already got people on the Patreon Discord who have got this, and they're all, dude, I'm jumping into HDR with what's considered a great picture. It punches above its weight when it comes to cost, and it didn't really feel like an arm and a leg like it did last year. And they're absolutely right. That's the one. Now, when it comes to OLED, though, and OLED's going to be the high-priced one, this is the B7A was the one I wrote down. So the B7A, this is something that you even see a lot of game designers are using if they're testing HDR in their labs, in their offices, and they want to test it and see what it looks like. It is a freakishly bright OLED. It actually does really good brightness. It does limit it. It does limit it, but it can have the momentary highs that HDR most of the time will need. And not every game is going to be your Origins where you're looking at a really bright thing. On the other hand, PC users, I would certainly say just be aware that you can notice some oddities when you're using a PC with that. And I've had people who are using it and they're like, I don't really notice it. I noticed it right away, but some people won't. You know, it'll just be one of those things. But this OLED is not only fantastically bright, it's got just excellent everything when it comes to how it handles its input, how it handles the lag, how it handles its scaling is very good. Scaling, which is basically taking your older content and you're getting it up to the 4K resolution the TV shows. Now, scalers, I don't really want to discuss these too much because scalers are sort of one of those technologies that are just inside. Some people, there's so many caveats to how you're going to use them. But what a scaler does is basically a scaler takes the resolution of whatever you're using or playing and makes sure that it matches the 4K of the output of the screen. If your Xbox One's already set to 4K or your PS4, then as long as it's 4K, the TV is not going to do anything with that and it's going to display it. But if it's anything other than that, then the scaler has to do some work. Or the Xbox scaler will do some work. And each system has their own, and each television has their own. And some television scalers are terrible, and some are really great. Another, I have to say, this is a harder TV to find, but the Samsung, the 8000, I think, it's one of the ones that I still have one of them left. They are really good scalers. And so you can get something that, I mean, I have old Babylon 5, and if you understand what that sci-fi show is, you're talking like, I swear to shit, it's 120p, but it's really low resolution. And it can get that up and not make it look terrible. And it won't make it look amazing, but what they do is they handle color gradients and some processing on the scaler. It's not just pixel doubling anymore. So what that would mean in the old days is you'd have your 4K or your 420p, let's say, and you wanted to get it to 4K. What the scaler would do is it would just double or quadruple your pixels and get you to that 4K. So let's say you had 1:1 as your pixel, low left, 1:1. That pixel is jet black. What an old style scaler would do is say, okay, I need to get this 4 times larger. So that means 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 pixel are all black as well. And so it just multiplies it. It just copies it over in a mathematical theorem to how many that you need to get that on the screen. What happens now is we have scalers that actually do processing on the picture. They do everything from, well, not everything, but some of them do things like a little bit of anti-aliasing. They do a little bit of color correction. They do a little bit of color fading. So if one, let's say pixel 1.1 is jet black and pixel 1.2 on the original native picture is jet white, then instead of just mimicking those and copying them out, it can grade that color and that brightness to the next pixel. So there's more of an even fade, 1.2, 1.3 to 1.4 when it comes to your pixels. And I know that's a little technical for some people, but I want to make sure that they understand, because a lot of us use older tech. A lot of us go out there and we have older movies that we like, or older shows, or you just have, your DVD collection that, is super old. And yeah, sure, your scaler may work in your DVD player, but you don't even know. It might just output a 1080p signal. So that means your TV scaler needs to do it. All of these TVs have fairly good scalers, good enough that you won't notice an issue as a normal gamer. And you certainly wouldn't need to be watching this if you needed to make that choice. It's one of those things where those 3 TVs are certainly good enough. Again, you have that TCL P607, you have the Sony 900E, and you have the LG OLED B7A. And you could consider it about 500 to 700, 750 to 1,000. And then I think the OLED now is like, for the smallest one, is like 1,200 or more, 12 or 1,300 or more. The reason why I say I think is because the prices, even today when I logged in, I was like, this video is it's a little later than I wanted, because I can't even lock down the prices. They're everywhere. And there's Black, Friday deals going on that take $500 off. So it's very difficult to cover and discuss. But those 3 TVs, your low-end TCL, fantastic input lag, good brightness, and punching above its weight. You got your Sony in the middle, which is just insane brightness on that TV. It's like the surface of the sun, which is great for a bright screen or a bright room, you know, versus the OLED, which it doesn't get as bright. It's got some issue with Windows, but if you're a movie watcher and a game player, and you know, you're like me where you're not playing, you know, every game isn't super bright or whatever, but there's bright moments, you'll be totally fine with that OLED, and you're going to notice a fantastic picture. This is a great time to sort of jump into the technology, guys. Last year, if you watch those primers, I was certainly not as high on HDR. HDR isn't necessarily in as many games as I would like, and one thing to remember, people, is that the HDR representation that you see in a game can be different from game to game. Yes, that is sad, and I don't want to add another variable here, so we won't discuss it too much. There hasn't been any terrible HDR implementations, but what happens is when it gets patched in, for some reason, some companies just get it nailed in right, and it looks good. And then some companies, there's some issues with how it's displayed, and it sometimes is better to have your HDR just off, which you can do on all these TVs anyway. So anyway, that's pretty much it for me. There's a lot of different technology out there. Remember the TCL, that's a great TV, your Sony and your LG. And I think when it comes down to it, we have our technologies that are taking over, and I think OLED right now is at a price where people could probably look at it and go, okay, I can make that jump if I want to. But I will say this, it's not necessarily future-proofing if you buy one of the OLEDs right now, because the brightness limiter has to go away. That's one thing. It just has to at some point. Their input lag isn't the best. It's good now, but there's been some issues there. And then I think the last thing I'll talk about before I go is firmware. One thing to be aware of is that these TVs get a lot of patches, and depending on the company, you will either have a lot of data about what those patches are, or you have none. One of the worst companies I've ever seen for patches is Samsung, and that's unfortunate. There's forum threads about it. There's people discussing it all the time, so I don't think that's a big surprise or a big secret. They don't tell you usually, and they've broken quite a few things during patches and then had to repatch it. That can sort of suck. Most other companies are better, and when you go in, there'll be a patch notes, or you'll be able to find it on their website. Samsung just has been notorious, as of late in particular, with making it very difficult. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys like the video. I hope it helps. Hey, maybe it helps a little bit, and you can go out there and you can make that decision. You can look at these different TVs. Maybe you can decide in between and get something different. But those are things to watch out for. You know, you want to watch out for how it handles its lighting. Is it edge lit? Is it full array? Or is it an OLED kind of screen? And of course, how it handles the brightness, and how it handles your color, and how it handles your input lag. Those are all incredibly important to gamers. When it comes to moviegoers, of course, input lag, far less important. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Patreon. Again, that is how I continue to give you guys videos like this. And I want to say thanks to every one of them. It's been absolutely awesome to sort of see people respond to the channel the way they have, and be able to help a couple other YouTubers. We're even doing it this month, helping other YouTubers who are having issues sort of get started, helping those guys out, which happens in Patreon. They tabletop simulator, we do gaming in there. So if you get a chance, go ahead and use the Amazon affiliate links in the description. That always helps the channel. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.